What it do, what it do? It's your boy Andre Sproul, and you are tuning into the Middle of the Fence podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, whether you're listening, watching, or both. As I like to say, time is the most valuable thing on this earth because we can spend it but can't make it back. So as always, thank you for your time. And for today's episode, we're going to throw it back a little bit, and we're going to look at the history of the suburbs, or as we know it as the Affluent Acres side on this podcast. And literally, we are going to delve into how it came to be into how we know it as today. And when you hear the word suburbs, what do you picture? Quiet streets, lawns, good schools, safety, maybe even success. But here's what most people never get taught. The suburbs didn't just happen, they were built intentionally. To understand the suburbs today, we have to start earlier than what most people think. So the suburbs existed long before highways and post-war housing developments, right? So people think that, often think that the suburbs came about after World War II, but came way, way before that. And even in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were what we call streetcar suburbs. And these were neighborhoods just outside of city centers made possible by trains and streetcars. And it's an interesting juxtaposition with that because the suburbs literally developed outside of city centers, which was made possible by trains and streetcars. And fast forward to today's day and age, and trains and public transport is much more prevalent in an urban background compared to a suburban background, even though that's literally what helped get it started in the first place during that time. And so basically, you could work in the city, but live somewhere with more space, less noise, and more separation. And early on, suburbs were marketed as these three factors. They were marketed as healthier, quieter, and more ideal than crowded urban centers. And that's the early blueprint of what later becomes the Affluent Acres. But then everything changes in the 1930s. When the federal government steps in. So in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the federal government creates new housing policies to stabilize the economy, especially around mortgages. And one of the most influential tools came from the FHA, which is better known as the Federal Housing Authority. Federal Housing Administration, and I should know that because I work in real estate, which evaluated neighborhoods based on what they called stability. And that stability was often tied to racial and economic factors. And this piece of research is from Corver Glenn in 2022. The FHA's historical underwriting guidance, especially from its 1936 manual, explicitly used racial segregation as a logic for neighborhood stability, deeming inharmonious racial groups as high risk, leading to redlining and disinvestment in communities of color. Though modern FHA rules now prohibit such discrimination and focus on fair housing today, aiming to counteract these historical disparities. And so, again, this is 1930s, all right? So racist times, all right? No other way to put it. And the mask of stability is what was used to hide the racism to eventually separate the suburbs and have it be its own entity into what it is and as we know it as today. And also, too, neighborhoods that were integrated or even might integrate and basically mess up what the country was trying to build on that side of the fence were seen as risky. And at the same time, maps were created that graded neighborhoods on lending risk. So some areas were marked as hazardous for investment, what we now refer to as redlining. So again, this is just a reminder to show that as early as the 1930s, the racist system was already being built to prohibit people of color from entering into these neighborhoods early on. And why that matters? Because at the end of the day, If money doesn't flow into a neighborhood, opportunity doesn't either. Again, if money doesn't flow into a neighborhood, opportunity doesn't either. So Affluent Acres didn't just have lawns and schools by accident. They had success, and tough terrain didn't struggle by coincidence. It was denied capital. Then World War II ends and everything accelerates. So post World War II, so now we're talking mid 1940s. History was one of my better subjects, so I know World War II was from 1942 to 1945. Shout out to private school education on the Affluent Acres side. And so after World War II, there was massive demand for housing because you had returning veterans, growing families, and a baby boom, which sometimes has been referred to as boomers from the babies born during that generation in a comedic context. And developers started building entire neighborhoods at once, mass-produced homes, affordable for some, and designed around single-family living. So, again, during this post-World War II era, they were focusing on building single-family homes. Like, no rentals, apartments, none of that. Just single-family homes so it can be geared towards a certain type of homeowner. And at the same time, the U.S. government started to invest heavily in highways during this time as well. The interstate system, which makes it normal to live far from where you work. So this is from the National Archives and Records Administration from 1956, which states, in urban areas, massive superhighways cut through neighborhoods and destroyed housing, much of it in its poorer sections of the city. So we are so used to the highway and accepting it for what it is. And fun fact is that if an interstate highway ends in an odd number, then it connects north to south, and if it ends in an even number, then it connects east to west. I'm not sure if you guys knew that or not, but you learn something new every day, as they say, right? And I wanted to highlight that portion specifically because fast forward to modern day and growing up as a child, having to commute every single day to the Affluent Acres side for school, whether it was in elementary school, middle school, high school. We literally felt that every single day. And I've expressed in a previous episode, sometimes we've had to cram into a regular four-door sedan just to make sure everyone gets to school and work. But all jokes aside, that was one of the biggest hurdles that a lot of people don't realize as part of the sacrifice. Like the financial sacrifice as far as, living in a tough terrain environment, but then going to the suburbs to a private school. The financial side, again, that's understood, point blank, period. But the driving portion is something that doesn't really get talked about or that you don't know unless you actually lived it, So it's not like, oh, okay, just drive like 5 minutes here, like 5 minutes there. Like sometimes it's like driving 30 minutes, almost an hour, 45 minutes because of, school wasn't that far, but going to the basketball games or friends' houses or events on that side of the fence. It was like driving was just such a big part. So finding out the role of interstate highways and that being built to further separate the Affluent Acres side of the fence from the tough terrain side of the fence really resonated with me from that perspective. So when people say, why don't more people just move to better neighborhoods? This is why that question isn't neutral. But let's be honest. Suburbs weren't all bad, and they weren't all good either. So let's look at the double truth, because as I always talk about on this show, about dual sides, right? So the upside from a suburban type of living is for many families it meant stability, safer streets, better funded schools, and the ability to build generational wealth through home ownership. And at the end of the day, although looking at the historical aspect of how the suburbs came to be as we know it as today can't deny the fact that it's the standard that most people want to be living. Like, why wouldn't you want to live in a neighborhood that is safe, nicely paved streets, really great schooling systems, and that have an abundance of resources for support for your children and your family and things like that. So, that's where the double-edged sword comes in, where if you didn't grow up in that environment in any sense, it's like that is the goal, whether we like to admit that or not. Now, the downside or the costs of the suburbs being developed into how they are today. So the one is segregation didn't disappear. So even after laws changed and try to get fair housing and all that type of stuff, the pattern stuck, right? So it doesn't mean that, oh yeah, if you are not white, then you're probably not living in a suburban town. Like, obviously, like, you see people of different racial backgrounds and ethnicities that live in suburban areas, but still to this day, it's not on equal footing, and I love to see a day where you can go into a suburban neighborhood and you go down the street and you see a bunch of different races and ethnicities. The closest thing that you get to that is New York City, and you don't exactly consider that suburban unless you're in a different part of New York, I guess. I don't know. I'm a Jersey guy, so let's get back on topic here. Another cost is the property taxes funding schools. So home values affect resources, and if your neighborhood starts ahead, it keeps compounding. So because property taxes fund schools and these suburban areas are benefiting from that allows them to have more resources and set children up to be more successful in the future compared to kids that grow up in a urban type of background. And this is from McGuire and Papke in 2008, which states, in recent decades, though the property tax has come under siege as a source of revenue for schools, the principal charge has been that since property wealth is unequally distributed across school districts, reliance on this source of revenue results in unacceptable differences in property tax rates, property revenues per pupil, and most importantly, spending per pupil across districts. The property tax is also criticized for being inequitable, inefficient, and complex. Let me make that a lot simpler for you guys. Because suburban areas are, because the property taxes benefit them a lot more, it makes it unfair across the board for everyone else, point blank period. And the only way that urban environments even have a chance to sniff an opportunity like that is if they get gentrified, unfortunately, because that means erasing the history of it and rewriting it and turning it into a new suburban development. And this is why the fence feels invisible to some people and painfully obvious to others. So when we talk about suburbs today, whether we love them, hate them, or want to live in them, we're really talking about history at the end of the day, right? And if you grew up like me, moving between two worlds, you felt that difference before you even knew the history. And this is the question that I pose for my audience tuning into this episode. Do you think the suburbs today are becoming more inclusive or just more expensive? Again, do you think the suburbs today are becoming more inclusive or just more expensive? Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast streaming platform, give us a 5-star rating, comment, and follow so we can continue growing the Middle of the Fence family. And if you tune in on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and hit the notification bell so you can be the first to be notified when the latest episode drops. And as always, thank you guys for tuning in. And no matter what side of the fence you grew up on, we're all more alike than we think. My name is Andre Spruill. Catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. And if you like this episode, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube and hit the little notification bell so you can be the first to be notified when the latest episode drops. Also, be sure to check us out on your favorite podcast streaming platform as well, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And again, no matter what side of the fence you grew up on, we're all more alike than we think.